Thanks for joining me here in episode number 2 in my new podcast series. I've titled this On the Cultural Differences in Conceptions of Power, and wanted to discuss what I believe is another root-level dynamic serving to cause much of the chaos we're witnessing today. It's my belief that two worldviews are at war at present, so different from one another that they're scarcely able to understand and interpret each other, and in fact quite often actively misunderstand one another, with devastating results. Just as it is with individuals, nations and cultures can't help but view all others through a lens of their own creation. They can't help but presume these others to be wired similarly to themselves. The French writer Anis Nin said, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." It's my contention that a high-trust society and culture, for example, can't help but assume the same of others they come into contact with. Similarly, a shrewd and crafty culture might naturally assume others to be operating from the same playbook of shrewdness and craftiness. One of the clearest examples of this mutual misreading would be how these two cultures might end up viewing offices and positions of power, even the idea of power itself. I wanted to start by a quote from one of the most popular and well-loved rabbis in Israel's short history, a man whose funeral drew 800,000, making it the most attended in the history of the nation. Quote, "Goyim were born only to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the people of Israel. Why are Gentiles needed? They will work, they will plow, they will reap. We will sit like an effendi and eat. That is why Gentiles were created." End quote. This is one of the two dominant conceptions of power in the modern world. Namely, power as a means of living a more comfortable and convenient life, through the doting servitude of those whom you rule over, as a means for personal gain, essentially slaves and vassals. This is an ethos based around what I've called other sacrifice, as contrasted with self-sacrifice. The ideas underlying other sacrifice encourage every individual to take as much as he possibly can from those he has power over, and to seek power as a means to more easily obtain such pleasures. Picture being gently wafted with palm fronds as you eat grapes. Next, we turn to the traditional Indo-European or Western conception of power, namely as the highest and most profound responsibility. Tsar Nicholas of Russia, for example, was so concerned about his ability to shoulder the awesome responsibility of being caretaker to his people that he had to practically be forced to take office. He didn't feel worthy of the role. During periods of hardship and turmoil for the nation, he'd often go days without sleeping, looking ashen and pale, struggling with the profound weight of an entire nation on his back, a nation which he cared for very deeply, in the manner in which a father cares for his children. Witness accounts and diary entries attest to this beyond any shadow of a doubt. Here was a man who served his nation by leading it. In the former case, we have power viewed as a means to an end, the end being hedonistic paradise, and that type of psychological satisfaction that arises in certain personalities from the act of dominating others. In the latter, we have power viewed as the ultimate duty to one's God and nation and people. The former view has inspired all Marxist modes of thinking, and that eternal ethos of the rebel seeking to depose his master, enviously eyeing what he believes is a lifestyle akin to heaven on earth, and desiring this for himself, failing to see or understand the immense responsibility of the office, and instead obsessively focusing on the materialistic trappings provided to the office holder. It's also at the root of the entire concept of class warfare, and the historical hatred stoked against kings and monarchs of old. One might go so far as to call it an ideology of revenge, a thirst for vengeance against those one views as unjustly living better or easier lives, and wanting the same for oneself. I bring up this comparison not only to help draw a differentiating line, but far more importantly to make a point that I don't think these are two viable philosophies, each with their own merits, each workable in their own way, but rather that one is healthy and natural and productive, the other unhealthy, unnatural, and destructive. And the reason is simple and obvious. One starts from the root of love and compassion towards one's people, earnestly seeking to do the best by them and for them, striving to be sober and prudent and disciplined and informed enough to be worthy of the role. And the other seeks power largely as a means for increased leisure or to correct some perceived injustice in the manner of, you have power, I don't have power, I want your power. Which of these two motive forces do you think might produce the best and most committed leadership? The cultural Marxist poison we've allowed to seep so deeply into academia over the recent decades has produced a generation that view power as practically synonymous with exploitation, as if that were the main role and purpose of power throughout history. This naturally led to the viewing of many of the greatest figures in history not as hard-working men brimming with merit, judgment, or character, earnestly wanting to make a positive impact on the world, but rather as brigands, as slave masters, as criminals, devious men looking to dominate their fellow man by any means necessary. And this brings us full circle to the earlier quote by Nin. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. The subversive culture that has hijacked most of the institutions in the Western world has proceeded to fundamentally reshape them in their own image by interpreting influential figures, both past and present, through their own sickly and malformed lens, presuming them to have the same base motives, the same petty desires, the same selfish goals. When base men author history, history becomes base. And our post-World War II era stands as profound testament to this. The reins of power are currently held by men seeking for a splinter in their neighbor's eye while missing the towering redwood tree in their own. And even when they can't find the splinters, they posit that surely they must exist in droves just beneath the visible surface, and go about creating their narratives accordingly. One of the sad paradoxes of the human condition is that those most fit and capable of leadership, those most wise or intelligent or possessing of sound character and judgment, rarely seek power, nor are they skilled self-promoters and showmen, or manipulators or deceivers. This is one of the reasons democracies can pose such grave dangers if the political system isn't created with an anti-corruption mechanism foremost in mind. Because the worst sorts of human beings always seek additional power, and inevitably view it in the negative context mentioned earlier. And in a democracy, one merely needs to control the informational inputs of the population to control their voting, and thus largely dictate the machinations of the political system. Major media is, of course, our most significant informational input, and because money can purchase media institutions, it was all but inevitable that media would end up controlling our political system. And what types of individuals are most likely to rise to the top of the financial ladder? Benevolent and compassionate men of true discipline, strength of will, and leadership? Or might it be rather the most shrewd, the most willing to compromise themselves, those most willing to manipulate and deceive? The tools required to best ascend the ladder of financial gain certainly aren't the tools required for leadership or justice and sound governance. There are certainly exceptions to be found. There still exist plenty of wealthy individuals of high caliber and good intent. But I'm only interested in the broader perspective with regards to the systems and structures, because it's these that matter, that serve to shape the future. And looking at the big picture, observing what traits and tendencies our modern financial system most rewards and which it most penalizes, it's almost as if certain forces had developed the most efficiently backward sorting and sifting mechanism possible, catapulting baser natures upward while simultaneously acting as an anchor to many of our generation's greatest men. To cite an example, let's take Marx. Karl Marx was a communist and considered communism to be naturalized humanism. Both of these doctrines have an endless supply of lofty language, catchy slogans, and might easily be seen by anyone lacking requisite context as a caring or humanitarian ethos. But considering that bit of wisdom regarding evil always wearing a pleasant mask or sweet-smelling perfumes, let's take a look at Marx himself. By any reasonable standard, the man was an abysmal human being. He admitted working for Satan, and once said, "I wish to avenge myself against the one who rules above." He was almost universally despised by everyone that came to know him. 4 of his children died of starvation due to neglect. This man was the epitome of other sacrifice, of being driven by hatred and envy and malice and every profoundly negative emotion known to man. Yet somehow, the seed spread by this man has sprung into a philosophy that represents, in large part, one of the 2 major warring factions in our world today, making him one of the most influential figures who ever lived. We might contrast him with the polar opposite extreme in Christ, and his example of wisdom, self-sacrifice, limitless goodwill, seeking balance and harmony, and operating from a motive force of love. This feverish battle against the patriarchy taking place today isn't merely against the idea of an earthly father, tasked with the ultimate responsibility as guide and caretaker for his children. It's equally against the idea of a heavenly father, or an ultimate creator, an ultimate ordering mechanism. We have the founder of Marxism openly praising Satan and blaspheming God. We have the founder of anarchist thought in Mikhail Bakunin stating, and I quote, "But here steps in Satan, the eternal rebel, the first free thinker and emancipator of worlds. He makes men ashamed of his bestial ignorance and obedience. He emancipates him, stamps upon his brow the seal of liberty and humanity, in urging him to disobey and eat of the fruit of knowledge." End quote. And flash forward to the present, we have the guiding philosophy behind Obama and the Clintons and so many others of the modern far left, Saul Alinsky, dedicating his book to Lucifer with high words of praise. These are not potential leaders of mankind. These are willful destroyers, harboring a hateful malice towards those above them. This is not a competition between 2 worldviews that genuinely seek the best for all humanity, and just happen to have slightly different ways of going about it. This is rather a battle of archetypes, a battle between natural hierarchy, order, and structure, and the malevolent urge to destroy these things. Keep in mind this isn't speculation. Many of these leading thinkers on the other side fully admit to being driven by hatred and malice. And looking at the few instances in which they've attained the power to carry out their aims, we see the largest and most vicious murder sprees in recorded history. Men willing to kill entire families because of their race or religion, who engaged in years of rape and pillage and the wholesale destruction of the most competent and hardest-working members of their societies. If this isn't a demonic force of the type mentioned in the Bible, or the Bhagavad Gita, or the Zoroastrian Gathas, then nothing is. It's the most archetypal example of chaos and confusion in human form. And if we're not able to defeat it, I suspect they'll make the Bolshevik Revolution and the resulting fallout of tens of millions murdered look like child's play over the coming decades. These men were not meant to be philosophers, intellectual architects, trailblazers, or leaders. To put it bluntly, they're sick and maladjusted men, an ever-present danger to the world, and they're meant to be contained. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my